Have you ever thought about whether animals can tell when something is wrong before people do? What you're about to hear might change the way you think about the connection between people and animals forever. This is the story of Thunder and Jake and how a horse's instincts saved one of London's darkest days. As dawn broke over London's old stones, the morning mist hung low over Horse Guards Parade. It was Tuesday of the Trooping the Colour Week, and the sound of hooves hitting cobblestones in a steady rhythm sounded like a military drumbeat in the cold air. Jake Morrison straightened his red tunic and looked at his watch. It was 0600 hours, which was right on time for the last dress rehearsal before the big ceremony on Saturday. Jake was 26 years old, and had steel-grey eyes that missed nothing. He had been in the Household Cavalry for 3 years. His fellow guardsmen often joked that he talked to his horse more than he did to people, and they weren't completely wrong. Thunder, his 8-year-old bay gelding, was 16 hands tall and had a coat that shone like polished mahogany in the morning light. The horse's ears moved all the time, picking up sounds that people couldn't hear. Jake felt Thunder's muscles tighten beneath him as the formation got into place. At first, the horse's gait changed in a small way, but then it got worse. Thunder's ears snapped forward like radar dishes, and he took deep breaths of the morning air through his wide-open nostrils. Jake had ridden Thunder in many ceremonies, parades, and training sessions, but he had never felt this mix of alertness and anxiety coming from the horse before. The other horses kept moving in perfect time, and their riders kept the perfect timing that made the Household Cavalry famous around the world. But Thunder started to go off the planned path. His head quickly turned toward the media pen area, where a few broadcast vans had been parked since the night before. Jake looked where his mount was looking and saw an unmarked white van parked just outside the press zone. Thunder's actions became more intense. The horse made a sharp, staccato snort 3 times in a row. Then came the stamp, 2 hard hits of his right front hoof against the cobblestones, which sounded like gunshots in the morning air. Jake saw the pattern right away. Thunder had been trained to find explosives while they were both in Afghanistan. This was his alert signal, which he had honed over months of dangerous patrols in enemy territory. As he looked more closely at the suspicious van, Jake's training kicked in. The press badge on the dashboard caught his eye first. It had the right BBC logo, but the laminate covering it had a different shine than the others he had seen. The reflection was too flat and too even, which made it look like a fake that had been made quickly. Jake saw extra wiring on the van's roof that didn't seem necessary for standard broadcast equipment, even though a GoPro camera rig was there. There were thin cables that went from the camera housing down to the inside of the car and through a small hole in the roof. Jake saw more things that made him worry as Thunder continued to act upset. There was a courier bag on the passenger seat of the van, and even from this distance, he could see white powder around the zipper teeth. It could have been talcum powder, flour, or something much worse. The license plate on the van looked new, and there were small scratches around the mounting screws that made it look like it had just been replaced. Jake carefully and slowly reached for his radio so that the tourists and reporters who had come to watch the rehearsal wouldn't notice. "Control, this is Trooper Morrison. I have a possible problem in the media area, grid reference Papa 7. The voice of the duty sergeant came through his earpiece, sounding annoyed. "Morrison, what kind of worry? We have important people coming in 30 minutes. Sergeant, there's a suspicious vehicle in the press zone. It's an unmarked van with modified equipment and possible explosive indicators. My mount is acting like it's trained to be alert." There was a pause, during which there was static and the sound of commands being yelled across the parade ground. When the sergeant's voice came back, it had the same dismissive tone that Jake had come to expect when he told him something that might make the strict schedule of ceremonial duties more difficult. "Morrison, horses get scared during rehearsals. It happens every time, Stay in formation and don't break the rules again. We can't have guardsmen chasing shadows when the cameras are rolling. Jake's jaw clenched when he heard the order, but Thunder had other plans. The horse wouldn't go back to the formation. Instead, he stood at an angle that blocked the camera's direct line of sight to the reviewing stand. Jake could tell a lot from Thunder's body language. His ears were slightly pinned back, his weight was evenly distributed across all four legs, and he was ready to move in any direction at any time. The other guardsmen started to notice the trouble. Corporal Davis moved his horse closer to Jake as they rode next to each other. "What's wrong with Thunder? He looks like he's about to run away." Jake spoke softly so that the noise from the ceremony preparations didn't drown him out. "He's alerting on something in that white van. He's acting the same way he did in Helmand when we found those IEDs near the forward operating base." Davis looked at the van that Jake was looking at, and his face grew serious. "Should we call the bomb squad?" Jake noticed something moving near the van before he could answer. Two men with press passes were packing up their gear in a hurry, moving too quickly and with too much purpose for journalists who were just finishing a photo shoot. One of them kept looking at the guardsman while talking quickly into a cell phone. As the men got closer to their van, Thunder's behavior got worse. Jake had never seen the horse back up on its own before. Thunder seemed to be trying to put more space between himself and whatever danger he had sensed. The horse's breathing sped up, and you could see puffs of steam in the cool morning air. Jake made a choice that would change everything. He broke formation again, and led Thunder in a wide arc that brought them closer to the van that looked suspicious. Jake turned on his radio again as they moved, but this time he did it in a different way. "Control, Trooper Morrison is asking for permission to do a routine security check on media vehicles. This is standard procedure for the week of the ceremony." This time, the answer came faster and was more helpful. "Morrison, you can only look at things. Don't talk to the media unless you have to." The horse's alert behavior was a great reason for the security check as Jake and Thunder got closer to the van. Jake was able to look into things more deeply without looking like he was acting on his own because Thunder's trained responses had given him the chance to do so. The two men by the van watched as they came closer, their faces going from annoyed to barely hidden worry. Thunder stopped exactly 10 feet from the back bumper of the van and wouldn't move any closer. He made it clear that this was as close as they should get to whatever danger was hiding in that car that looked so innocent. Jake got off his horse, and the sound of his boots hitting the cobblestones echoed off the buildings around him. The morning rehearsal went on around them, but Jake and Thunder felt like they were in a bubble of heightened awareness, separate from the usual pageantry because they knew something was very wrong. The two men by the van had stopped packing and were staring at Jake as he walked up with the kind of intense focus that experienced soldiers learned to recognize as a sign that violence was about to happen. Jake could feel the energy in the cobblestones under Thunder's hooves through their connection. Jake was so focused on how his horse was acting that it was like he was back in Afghanistan, when they were deployed together. Thunder's ears kept moving around, picking up frequencies that humans can't hear, and his strong neck muscles stayed tense. Jake Morrison was always different from the other guardsmen in one important way: he paid as much attention to animals as most people do to their commanding officers. Jake was 26 and had steel-gray eyes that showed both determination and worry. He had problems that went beyond his ceremonial duties. His mother's medical bills had been piling up since she was diagnosed with early-onset dementia. The British healthcare system was good, but it couldn't pay for the specialized care she needed. Jake had to make a dangerous deal with a predatory lending company that worked in the grey areas of London's financial district because he was under so much financial stress. Marcus Henley, the company's main collector, had made it clear that missing even one payment would have effects that went far beyond bad credit. Henry had just shown Jake carefully edited videos from the guardsmen's social media accounts that made his occasional complaints about the military bureaucracy seem much more serious than they really were. Henry had told them at their last meeting, "Your mother's care facility gets regular visits from tabloid photographers." His voice had the calmness of a man who made money by ruining lives. It would be bad if they got video that made it look like one of Her Majesty's guards was against the government. The headlines write themselves, don't they? Jake's phone buzzed against his chest, bringing him back to the present. Thunder immediately reacted to the small change in Jake's posture by turning his huge head to look straight at his rider. Jake was always amazed by how smart Thunder's dark eyes were. It was as if Thunder could see the stress coming from every muscle in Jake's body. Henry sent the text message at a time that made it seem like they were always watching. "Payment is due in 48 hours. We've noted your mother's afternoon walk schedule at St. Mary's Care Home. The gardens there are beautiful, and I wouldn't want her to feel unsafe while she's out and about." Jake's jaw tightened as he deleted the message, but Thunder could already tell that his rider was feeling different. The horse moved to the side, putting himself between Jake and the white van that had made the first alert. Jake had seen Thunder do this protective move many times in combat zones, when the animal's better senses picked up on threats before humans could. Not many people knew about the secret program that Thunder had been in for military training. 3 years before the project started, the defense contractor that was in charge of it had been quietly shut down after a corruption scandal. However, they had already come up with groundbreaking ways to train horses to find explosives and assess threats. Thunder had a small geometric pattern on his left flank that looked like random marks to people who didn't know what they were looking at. It was the brand of their program and stood for hundreds of hours of specialized training. The horse's ability to find pattern traces, read human micro-expressions, and spot electronic problems had saved lives while they were in Afghanistan. Thunder could tell the difference between the chemical signatures of real electronics and improvised explosive devices with more accuracy than most mechanical detection systems. More importantly, he had learned how to read the small changes in behavior that showed someone was hostile. Jake saw things that most people would have missed as the rehearsal formation moved through its set patterns around Horse Guards Parade. The crowd along the ceremonial route showed how diverse London is. Tourists speaking Mandarin, and Spanish mixed with local families, and university students, streamed the event live for their social media followers around the world. Food vendors set up their carts in the right places to catch the extra people from the official ceremony. Jake could smell the unique smells of international foods mixing with the more familiar smells of traditional British foods. A group of protesters had gathered near the designated free speech zone across from the parade ground. Their signs talked about how unfair the economy is and how privileged the royals are. It was both legal and expected for them to be there. London's democratic traditions called for space for dissent, even during ceremonies. Jake's training had taught him how to tell the difference between real political expression and real security threats, but Thunder's constant agitation made him think that something more dangerous was going on in the crowd that seemed normal. As they got closer to the media pen area, the horse's breathing changed slightly, becoming faster and shallower. Jake knew that this was Thunder's way of reacting to finding small amounts of chemicals that shouldn't be in the environment. During their deployment, Thunder acted the same way when they got close to cars that had hidden bombs inside, even when those bombs were hidden under layers of real cargo. Corporal Davis moved his horse closer to Jake's position, and his face showed that he was worried about both the horse and the rider. "Morrison, Thunder looks like he wants to run away. What's going on with him?" Jake spoke softly because he knew that reporters were walking around with cameras and recording equipment. "He's acting the same way he did in Helmand Province when we found those improvised explosive devices near the forward operating base. Something in that white van, has set off his trained response system. Davis looked at the suspicious car that Jake was looking at. His own military experience helped him understand the strange things that Jake had seen before. From this distance, the press credentials look real, but there is something wrong with how their equipment is set up. There is too much wiring for a standard broadcast rig. Thunder did something that Jake had never seen during ceremonial duties, as if he were responding to their conversation. The horse started to back up, putting space between him and the perceived threat while still being able to see the suspicious van. Thunder's training included situational awareness protocols that taught him how to position himself the best tactical advantage while keeping his rider safe from any possible blast effects. Jake's radio came to life with routine coordination chatter between different security elements, but he noticed that the communication pattern had gaps that made it seem like not all units were working with the same information. The Metropolitan Police helicopter that usually flew over the rehearsals was missing, and so were some of the plainclothes security officers who usually worked the crowd. Thunder's ears turned toward a new sound, the distinctive electronic beep of a device turning on. Jake followed the horse's gaze and saw one of the men near the white van using what looked like a tablet computer. The man moved too quickly and with too much purpose for someone who was just watching footage or changing camera settings. He looked like he was entering data or starting a program with the same level of focus that Jake thought was needed for mission-critical tasks. The sun rose higher over London's old buildings in the morning, casting long shadows across the parade ground and making the differences between the city's old buildings and its new surveillance systems stand out. CCTV cameras on lamp posts and building corners kept a close eye on the ceremony, and facial recognition systems figured out who was there. But even though London had a lot of advanced technology, it was Thunder's simple but very sharp senses that had picked up on the problem that could have ruined the carefully planned event. Jake made a choice that would put both his military training and his faith in the bond he had with Thunder to the test. Instead of following the rules and waiting for higher command to confirm, he decided to trust what his horse said about the situation. Thunder had never given him false alarms before, and Jake knew that the horse's instincts for survival were much better than bureaucratic rules when lives were at stake. It wasn't a coincidence that Thunder heard the electronic beep earlier. Marcus Blackwood looked at several screens showing feeds from London's ceremonial district in a converted warehouse 3 miles from Horse Guards Parade. Blackwood was a new kind of threat that security services had trouble categorizing. He was 42 years old, had graying temples, and moved with the kind of precision that showed he had been in the military. Blackwood's background was like a warning story about how ideas and technology can mix. Former MI5 cyber operations officer, let go 3 years ago after an investigation into corruption showed that he was working with grey zone contracting companies that did business in a shady area between legitimate intelligence work and mercenary activities. The official records said there were philosophical differences with departmental objectives, but the truth was much more complicated. In the last few months of his time with MI5, Blackwood became more and more sure that the British monarchy was a complicated lie meant to keep people in line through tradition and pageantry. His access to classified psychological operations research had shown him how carefully planned ceremonial events were meant to keep people from thinking critically about how power is spread out. What started out as academic interest had turned into an obsession. Blackwood had told his handler during his last debrief that the whole system is built on lies dressed up as tradition. His voice was full of passion, as if he believed he had found the truth. Every parade, ceremony, and display of royal splendor is meant to make regular people feel small and thankful for the scraps they get from their betters. Someone needs to pull back the curtain on this elaborate theater. He had been moving slowly but surely from working for the government to being a revolutionary activist. Before he left, Blackwood used his security clearance to copy terabytes of information about crowd psychology, surveillance systems, and threat assessment protocols. More importantly, He had found flaws in the systems he had helped design. These flaws could be used by someone with his technical skills and knowledge of the organization. Blackwood's new warehouse was both a command center and a weapons lab. In climate-controlled cabinets, rows of computer servers hummed quietly. Their processors were always working to make deepfake content and plan digital disinformation campaigns. There was a timeline on one wall that showed major royal events that would happen over the next 6 months, along with detailed vulnerability assessments for each ceremony. Horse Guards Parade was the perfect place to test out techniques that would be improved and used during the real Trooping the Color celebration. Blackwood's method of combining cyber warfare with traditional explosives was not something that most security experts had thought of before. Instead of trying to kill as many people as possible with big bombings, his plan was to cause as much psychological damage as possible through carefully planned chaos. A small bomb that went off during a ceremony that was broadcast around the world would cause more social unrest than a dozen regular attacks that happened without media coverage. The modified camera gear that Thunder found was the result of months of careful planning and new technology. The device looked like normal broadcast equipment, and it had real BBC credentials that Blackwood got through a network of journalists who agreed with his anti-establishment views. But the extra wiring that Jake Morrison had seen was for a much more evil purpose. Inside the camera housing was a complex trigger system that could be turned on from a distance using encrypted smartphone apps. The device was made to blow up a small but very visible explosive charge at the height of media coverage, when cameras from all over the world would be focused on the ceremony. The explosion would be recorded in high definition and sent to billions of people right away. This would make a permanent link between royal pageantry and violent chaos. But the physical attack was just one part of Blackwood's full attack on the legitimacy of institutions. His servers were set up to quickly spread false information on social media after the explosion. Deepfake videos that show official government responses, fake witness testimonies, and altered historical footage would make different stories about who is to blame and why. The goal wasn't just to hurt people but also to make people doubt the government's ability to keep people safe during important national events. Blackwood thought that if regular people could see how weak the monarchy was in real time, they would start to doubt everything they had been told about power, privilege, and safety. Blackwood watched the rehearsal through several information streams while the morning sun shone through the dirty windows of the warehouse. Traffic cameras gave us wide-angle views of how crowds moved, and hacked police radio frequencies gave us real-time updates on where security was stationed. Most importantly, his network of sympathetic observers gave him human intelligence that no electronic surveillance system could match. One of these watchers was currently standing near the media pen at Horse Guards Parade, pretending to be a freelance photographer covering the preparations for the ceremony. She had told someone through an encrypted messaging app that one of the Household Cavalry Horses and its rider was acting strangely. The horse seemed to be responding to trained alerts, and the guardsman seemed to be doing inspections of equipment without permission. Blackwood's experience in threat assessment quickly made him aware of how important this change was. One of the few weak spots in his carefully planned operation was military animals trained to find explosives. Electronic surveillance systems could be hacked, and people could be tricked into thinking they were being watched. But a properly trained detection animal worked on instincts that were almost impossible to fool. The fact that there was such an animal at today's rehearsal made it seem like his intelligence gathering had missed an important part of the security plans. It was even more worrying that the horse's behavior might cause bomb disposal protocols to be activated too soon, which would reveal his carefully hidden devices before the planned time for detonation. Blackwood's fingers flew over the keys of his keyboard as he started the contingency plans that had been made for this exact situation. Instead of giving up on the operation, he decided to speed up the timeline and switch to what he called Plan B. This was a more aggressive plan that would have the greatest effect even if some parts of the original plan were compromised. The first step of Plan B was to wake up sleeper agents, who were hiding in London's delivery network. These people could move bombs and trigger equipment across the city while looking like they were doing normal business by using popular food delivery and courier apps. Their motorcycles and bicycles had hidden compartments that could avoid regular vehicle searches. Their official company uniforms helped them blend in with London's busy service economy. A dozen courier vehicles started moving to different places around the ceremonial district just minutes after Blackwood gave the order. Once they got to their planned locations, each one had parts that could be put together to make improvised explosive devices. The weapons were made to be modular and flexible, so they could be changed to fit different targets and attack situations as the security situation changed. The second step was to use advanced electronic warfare tools to take out London's communication systems at the right time. Blackwood had found certain weaknesses in the cellular networks and Wi-Fi systems that linked the different security agencies in charge of keeping the ceremony safe. By sending fake signals and denial of service attacks to these networks, he could make it so that people couldn't talk to each other and plan how to respond to his attacks. As these preparations sped up, Blackwood got new information about the horse and rider that seemed suspicious. Trooper Jake Morrison, the guardsman, had a service record that included going to Afghanistan with military working animals. Morrison's apparent willingness to break formation and the rules because his horse was acting up was even more worrying. Blackwood knew that Morrison was the kind of person who could ruin carefully made plans by making decisions that were hard to predict. Soldiers with field experience often trusted their instincts over official rules, unlike bureaucratic commanders who followed strict rules. This made Morrison a wild card that needed to be stopped or redirected before he could make things very difficult. Blackwood's network of financial intelligence found the answer. They had found out that Morrison was weak to economic pressure because of his mother's medical bills and predatory lending deals. A quick call to Marcus Henley, the debt collector who had been putting pressure on Morrison for months, gave the guardsman a chance to change his behavior at the right time. "Put as much pressure on him as you can right now," Blackwood told Henley over an encrypted voice app. "Send him pictures of what his mother does every day and make clear threats about her safety. Make him choose between his duty and his family." Blackwood used facial recognition software to keep an eye on Morrison's mood during the morning rehearsal at Horse Guards Parade. The software looked at micro-expressions that the surveillance cameras picked up. The guardsman's stress levels were clearly higher, which put him under the kind of mental stress that would make it harder for him to make decisions and make him less of a threat to the operation. However, Thunder's continued alert behavior was still a big worry. You couldn't change the horse's training or instincts by putting psychological or financial pressure on it. As long as the animal stayed at the ceremony site, it was an unpredictable factor that could reveal Blackwood's well-hidden devices in ways that no security scanner could copy. As the rehearsal reached its most important part, the VIP walkthrough in the St. James's Stable Yard corridor, the morning sun rose higher over Horse Guards Parade. This narrow path linked the parade route to the reviewing stand, where important people would gather for the ceremony on Saturday. Security planners had identified it as both necessary and weak, making it a natural choke point. Thunder's behavior had changed from just being alert to being almost ready for battle. His tail stayed up in a stiff arc, and his left ear stayed in a fixed position that Jake remembered from their time in Afghanistan. The horse's breathing had changed to a fast, shallow pattern that showed he was very stressed. His strong muscles were coiled up under his shiny coat like springs under pressure. As the group got closer to the corridor entrance, Thunder did a diagonal sidestep that blocked Jake's planned path to the VIP group. To people who weren't paying close attention, the move looked like an accident, but Jake could feel the carefulness in every step. Thunder wasn't just avoiding something, he was actively changing their path based on threat assessment calculations that were beyond human understanding. The horse's huge head suddenly turned toward a man with official press credentials who was standing about 30 feet from the entrance to the hallway. At first glance, the person looked real because they had the right BBC ID and professional photography equipment, but Thunder's focus on them was clear. The horse's nostrils flared up and down as he took in the scent information that was carried on the morning breeze. His ears followed the man's every move with the focus of a predator stalking its prey. Jake looked where Thunder was looking and saw things that his military training had taught him to look for. There were small differences in the man's press harness. The fabric looked newer than the metal hardware, which suggested that it had just been put together instead of being used in the field for years. The way the man handled his gear was more worrying. He was so careful that it looked like he knew how to use trigger mechanisms instead of regular photography controls. Jake saw that the person was wearing what looked like a regular photographer's glove on his right hand, but there was a small rectangular bulge along the palm that could be hiding electronics. The glove's material also reflected light in a way that was different from leather or fabric, which could mean that it has synthetic parts that could hold wireless transmission equipment. Thunder's actions got worse as they got closer to the suspect. The horse started to herd Jake in a subtle way, moving his body to change the angle so that Jake could see the man's hands and tools clearly. Thunder's training in Afghanistan had taught him how to put his rider in the best position for tactical advantage, and Jake saw the pattern right away. As the VIP procession entered the hallway, it was time to make a choice. Protocol said that Jake had to stay in formation and not do anything that might mess up the carefully planned ceremony. But Thunder's growing agitation made it clear that the horse had sensed a real danger that needed to be dealt with right away. Jake made a decision that would put both his military training and his willingness to trust Thunder's judgment over official rules to the test. He broke away from the group on purpose and led Thunder toward the suspect while staying relaxed so that nearby civilians and reporters wouldn't be alarmed. Jake said, "Excuse me, sir," in the polite but firm voice that British soldiers learned to use when dealing with crowds. "I have to check the equipment as part of our security procedures for the week of the ceremony." The man reacted right away, and it was clear what he meant. Instead of the mild annoyance or cooperation that real journalists usually showed during security checks, his eyes darted quickly between the entrance to the corridor and Jake, showing that he was thinking about whether to fight or run away. Jake saw that the man was very stressed out because his hands were shaking slightly as he held onto the camera gear. "I have the right credentials," the man said, his accent sounding European in a way that didn't match the British press identification he showed. "My editor will be very angry if I miss the shot because of delays that aren't necessary." Thunder reacted right away, and in a big way, to the man's voice. The horse's ears snapped back against his head, and his whole body got tense, ready to move quickly. Jake had seen this same reaction during combat operations when Thunder found people who were about to attack their unit. "I understand your worries about timing," Jake said as he got off his horse smoothly, keeping his hands in view so he could act quickly if he needed to. "This will only take a minute, and it helps keep everyone safe during this important event." As Jake got closer, Thunder stayed between him and the suspect, a protective formation that the horse had learned during their deployment. Jake's trained eye quickly saw that the man's equipment was set up in a strange way. The battery pack for the camera had marks on it where extra wiring had been added, and the lens housing had parts that didn't look like they belonged to a normal camera. The most worrying thing was finding a small device attached to the camera's flash unit that didn't have any manufacturer's markings or any obvious photographic function. Jake saw new solder marks around the connection points on the device, which showed that it had been carefully machined rather than made in large numbers. Jake turned on his radio with careful movements that looked normal but were very important. "Control, this is Trooper Morrison. I have a code amber situation in the media area. There are problems with the media devices that need to be looked at right away." The response came through his earpiece in seconds, but the tone was more bureaucratic annoyance than tactical worry. "Morrison, we have important people in the hallway and cameras rolling. This is not the time to check equipment that could make things look bad." "Got it, Control," Jake said while still looking the suspect in the eye. However, the irregularities include changed electronics and unknown parts that could break security rules for the ceremonial area. The suspect started packing his things during this exchange, and the way he moved was too quick and deliberate for someone who was just following the rules for an inspection. Jake noticed that the man was careful to keep the modified camera components away from direct examination while maintaining a facade of cooperation. During the fight, Thunder's actions gave us important information. The horse's focus moved back and forth between the suspect and another person who had shown up at the end of the hallway. This suggests that more than one operator was involved in the activity. Thunder's ears followed both people, and his body language showed that he was ready to move quickly in either direction. Jake's determination made the suspect crew leave their post earlier than planned, which led to the resolution. They left the area rather than risk having their modified equipment looked at for a long time. They gave reasons for the changes in schedule, and editorial priorities that sounded rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Jake carefully looked around the area where the suspicious people had been after they left. Thunder led him to a small piece of pavement where the horse's trained senses picked up on chemical traces that people couldn't see. More importantly, Jake found small scratches around a nearby utility access cover that looked like they had been made recently. Within minutes of the fight ending, it became clear how much Jake's choice would cost him personally. His phone buzzed with a message that came at a time that made it seem like someone was always watching him. Marcus Henley, the debt collector who had been bothering Jake for months about his mother's medical bills, sent the text. The message said, "We have noted that your mother walks in the afternoon at St. Mary's Care Home. She picked the garden path near the main entrance at 2:30 p.m. today. It's a nice spot that is easy to see from the street. I would hate for her to feel unsafe while she is going about her daily business." The message had a picture taken that morning of Jake's mother slowly walking down the garden path of the care facility. The camera's telephoto view made her already weak body look even more vulnerable. The picture was carefully put together to show how alone and defenseless she was, which made it clear that there was a threat without needing to be explained. Jake's jaw tightened as he thought about what it meant. While he was busy protecting strangers at a ceremonial event, someone had been keeping an eye on his family. The timing of the threat made it seem like several hostile groups were working together, which made people wonder how much of his personal life had been affected. Thunder could tell right away that Jake was upset. He turned his huge head to look at his rider's face with the kind of focus that horses only give to pack leaders when they are stressed. The animal was smart enough to know that the immediate tactical threat had been replaced by a different kind of danger that was outside the parade ground. Jake got the call he was expecting from his bosses after the VIP procession went through the hallway without any problems. Jake knew that Thunder's alert behavior had stopped something much worse than a bureaucratic reprimand, even though protocol violations and bad press from media liaisons would have led to formal disciplinary action. The events of the morning set a pattern that would shape everything that came after. Thunder's superior threat detection abilities were pitted against the institution's unwillingness to use unconventional security methods. At the same time, Jake's personal weaknesses gave hostile forces points of leverage that they could use to make him less effective as a protector of public safety. The scheduled ceremonial cannon test fire broke the morning calm at Horse Guard's parade like glass. It echoed across London's ancient stones. The loud boom that usually signaled the start of royal celebrations became Marcus Blackwood's cue to move his timeline forward to what he called Plan B. Within seconds of the cannon's echo fading, encrypted messages flashed across London's delivery network, waking up sleeper cells that had been placed throughout the city like pieces on a digital chessboard. Jake Morrison could feel Thunder's huge body tense up under him as the horse's amazing senses picked up on things that people can't see. The animal's ears moved quickly from side to side, following several electronic signatures that had suddenly turned on in the ceremonial district. Thunder's nostrils flared as he took in chemical traces carried by the morning breeze. These traces showed that people who looked like they were making regular commercial deliveries were moving explosive compounds through London's busy streets. Jake saw the pattern of coordinated movement that Thunder was picking up on and changed from ceremonial guard to tactical operator in a matter of seconds. This same mix of electronic signatures and chemical traces had come before every major attack on their forward operating base while they were in Afghanistan. Thunder's training taught him how to tell the difference between legitimate business operations and hostile logistics operations, even when they used the same vehicles and tools. Control, this is Morrison. Multiple mobile signatures consistent with coordinated activity. Request immediate tactical support and clearance for pursuit operations. Jake's radio transmission had the sharp authority of a soldier who had gone from ceremonial duties to being ready for combat without hesitation. The answer that came through his earpiece was full of bureaucratic confusion instead of tactical understanding. Morrison, please explain your request. We don't see any signs of hostile activity in the ceremonial district. Stay in formation and get ready for the VIP arrival sequence. Before Jake finished sending his message, Thunder had already started moving. The horse was smart enough to know what his rider was going to do next, and they were in sync in a way that only came from fighting together. Instead of waiting for official permission that might never come, Thunder set up at the exit of the parade ground closest to the patterns of vehicle movement he had seen. The chase started when Jake made a choice that would change everything that came after. He trusted Thunder's judgment more than official rules and led the horse toward the street network, where hostile forces were moving their weapons into position for coordinated attacks along London's ceremonial route. Thunder's walk changed right away from the slow, steady pace of ceremonial duty to the smooth, powerful stride of an animal bred for speed and endurance in very bad weather. Thunder had to find his way through London's old street network, which was both a problem and an opportunity. He did this with a level of tactical awareness that human riders could never reach on their own. The horse's peripheral vision let him see multiple movement vectors at once, and his hooves could feel ground vibrations, which let him know when vehicles were coming that people couldn't see. As they got closer to the Whitehall bottleneck, where tourist buses and security bollards made a natural choke point that forced all traffic into predictable patterns, the first target of the chase appeared. Thunder's ears locked onto a motorcycle courier wearing the green jacket that is a trademark of a well-known food delivery service. However, the way the rider moved was not typical of someone doing regular business. He drove too purposefully through gaps in traffic, took risks that weren't necessary to keep up his speed, and carried equipment that seemed too heavy for regular food delivery work. Thunder followed at a diagonal path that cut through the spaces between buses and pedestrians with an accuracy that was hard to explain. The horse seemed to anticipate traffic light changes, pedestrian movements, and even the timing of security patrols that might interfere with their pursuit. Jake became a passenger to Thunder's tactical intelligence, giving steering input for moves that the horse had already planned and started. Jake's suspicions about the courier's hostile intent were confirmed by the first evasive move. Instead of stopping when a cavalry officer told him to, the rider sped through a red light and started weaving between cars with the kind of aggressive driving that showed he was in a hurry. The rider's choice of route was even more worrying because they avoided main roads in favor of secondary streets that offered better cover but made legitimate delivery operations less efficient. Thunder's reaction to the evasive action showed why military working animals were such useful tools in city operations. The horse changed his angle of pursuit to take into account the courier's likely escape routes. He used his knowledge of London's street network to get into position to intercept the target instead of just following the target's actual path. Thunder had been doing ceremonial duties for months, memorizing traffic patterns, construction zones, and pedestrian flows. Now, this mental map was useful for tactical purposes. The Soho area was hard to get around because of its narrow streets and heavy foot traffic, which made it easy to hide and set up ambushes. As they entered this maze of interconnected passages, Thunder's behavior changed. His ears were always moving to pick up on sounds that could mean there were more enemies nearby. Jake could focus on his main target because the horse could tell the difference between innocent civilian activity and coordinated surveillance. Thunder kept an eye on their flanks for possible threats. The courier made a mistake when he tried to use an alley that was only for pedestrians as an escape route. He didn't know that Thunder could get through spaces that were too small for motorcycles but big enough for a skilled cavalry horse. Thunder shortened his stride and lowered his head to fit through the opening while keeping up a speed that kept them close enough to hit their target. The move also put them at the end of the alley before the courier could get out, giving them a chance to catch him that pure speed could never have given them. When Thunder heard the unique electronic signature of the trigger device that the courier had in his delivery bag, his ears perked up. The horse had been trained in Afghanistan to recognize the specific frequency patterns that remote detonation systems send out. His alert behavior made it clear what the courier was carrying. The fight happened at Camden Lock, where the narrow pedestrian bridge made it hard for people to get away. Thunder stood in the way of the courier while giving Jake clear lines of sight to assess the situation. The courier's reaction confirmed their suspicions. Instead of being confused or angry that a horse was blocking his path, his hand went right to a hidden device in his jacket. As Jake got off his horse, his military training kicked in. He moved in a way that looked casual to people walking by, but it put him in a good position to respond quickly to any situation. "Sir, we need to check your cargo for security compliance during the ceremonial period. This is a food delivery inspection." The courier's answer came right away and was very clear. Instead of making delivery papers or saying he was confused about strange security measures, he started to back away while still keeping in touch with the hidden device. His eyes kept moving between Jake and Thunder, looking for ways to get away with the kind of tactical awareness that showed he had military or paramilitary training. Thunder's actions stopped what could have turned into a violent fight in a crowded public place. The horse stepped forward with careful precision, using its huge size to create physical pressure that made the courier choose between leaving his post or risking injury from a 1,500-pound animal that clearly meant to stop him from getting away. The courier made a tactical mistake by trying to turn on his device while still within Thunder's range of fire, which led to the end of the fight. The horse's reaction was quick and clear. It moved in a way that knocked the courier off balance while Jake grabbed the trigger device before it could be used. When Metropolitan Police units got to the scene in response to Jake's earlier reports, Thunder's focus shifted to new threats that people hadn't noticed yet. The horse's ears turned toward the Thames riverfront, where its heightened senses had picked up chemical signatures and electronic patterns that pointed to a bigger staging area for the planned attack. They had gotten a key part of Blackwood's plan when they caught the courier, but Thunder's constant alertness made it clear that they had only stopped one part of a bigger plan. The horse was smart enough to tell the difference between threats that had been successfully neutralized and threats that were still there and needed to be chased down. Jake felt the familiar rush of excitement that came over him when Thunder got ready for long tactical missions. The horse's breathing changed, to a steady rhythm that showed it could keep up a high level of performance for a long time. Its muscles were tense, which showed it was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead in their search for the remaining hostile elements operating in London's ceremonial district. The morning chase had shown how combining human tactical intelligence with animal sensory superiority could lead to unique results. However, Jake knew that their success so far had only delayed Blackwood's larger plan to use coordinated violence and digital manipulation to disrupt London's most sacred traditions. The Thames riverfront warehouse district was covered in morning industrial haze, and Thunder's hooves hit the wet pavement in a steady rhythm. The horse's amazing sense of smell and touch had led them through London's maze of old streets to this group of brick buildings that looked like they had been abandoned since the Victorian era. Jake recognized Thunder's behavior from their most dangerous missions in Afghanistan. The horse was on high alert, which meant they were getting close to the center of whatever threat it had been following all morning. Thunder's huge head suddenly turned toward a building that looked just like all the other converted warehouses along the Thames. But the horse's nostrils flared up and down as he picked up chemical signatures that were carried on the river breeze. These signatures were too small for humans to see, but Thunder's specialized training let him find them with deadly accuracy. His ears locked into fixed positions that showed there was electronic activity in the building, and his breathing changed to the controlled rhythm that came before high-risk tactical operations. Jake got off his horse in a way that would have seemed casual to anyone watching, but it put him in a position to quickly respond to any threats that came his way. Thunder quickly took a defensive position that blocked Jake's path to the main entrance of the warehouse. This also made it easy for him to see other ways to get there and possible escape routes. The horse's tactical intelligence had figured out the best place to be based on the layout of the buildings, the direction of the wind, and the level of noise in the area that could hide the approach of more hostile forces. Jake's military training helped him notice small changes to the outside of the warehouse that had happened recently. The loading dock doors had scratches around their locks that made it look like they were opened often, even though the building was supposed to be empty. The walls were freshly painted, and there were what looked like new security cameras on the outside. There were also high-capacity electrical cables that ran from the building to underground utility tunnels, which were even more concerning because they looked too strong for regular business use. Jake found an access door that had been carefully hidden to look like it was sealed and unused because Thunder was so focused on one part of the building's outside wall. The hinges on the door had recently been oiled, and the bricks around it had tiny chips that showed they had been opened and closed a lot. As they got closer to this entrance, Thunder's behavior got worse. His body language showed that the threat he had been following all morning was right on the other side of this door. The inside of the warehouse showed how advanced Marcus Blackwood's operation was in ways that Jake had never imagined. In climate-controlled cabinets, rows of computer servers hummed quietly. Their processors were always working to coordinate what looked like a full-scale attack on London's information infrastructure. There were a lot of wall-mounted screens showing live feeds from traffic cameras, social media sites, and news networks. This made for a command center that was better than anything Jake had seen in military bases. Thunder's attention was immediately drawn to a locked interior stall that had been built on the main floor of the warehouse. Jake had never seen the horse act this way toward this area before, even though they had been working together for a long time. Thunder walked up to the stall door with the kind of recognition that made it clear he knew the person there. His movements had an emotional weight that went beyond his usual tactical assessments. The inside of the stall showed a link that explained Thunder's amazing skills and gave important information about Blackwood's knowledge of how to find horses. Inside the small space was a metal crate with shipping labels from Meridian Defense Solutions, the same contractor that had created Thunder's specialized training programs during their secret program in Afghanistan. The crate held old training materials, conditioning equipment, and most importantly, samples of the exact chemicals that had been used to teach Thunder how to find explosives. Jake's look at the training materials showed how terrible Blackwood's preparations were. The former MI5 officer didn't just happen to notice Thunder's abilities by chance. Instead, he used classified databases that he shouldn't have had access to systematically look into the horse's past and found Thunder to be a possible threat to operations that used hidden explosives. The crate also had video of Thunder's first training sessions, which showed the young horse learning to tell the difference between dozens of different explosive signatures through repetitive conditioning exercises. Blackwood had looked at these recordings to learn exactly how Thunder's detection system worked. This helped him come up with ways to avoid the horse's better senses and ways to fight back. It was even more troubling to find out that the training compounds had been changed recently. Blackwood had changed the chemical signatures of his bombs to look a lot like real industrial chemicals that Thunder wasn't trained to see as threats. This explained why Thunder had been confused and unsure at times during their chase. The horse was picking up on familiar base compounds mixed with strange additives that made signals that weren't clear. The warehouse's main computers showed the full extent of Blackwood's attack on London's ceremonial traditions. There were hundreds of deepfake video files on the servers that could be automatically released on social media within minutes of any explosion or disruption at Horse Guards Parade. These videos showed fake government responses, altered historical footage, and fake witness testimonies that were meant to make it as hard as possible to figure out who was responsible and why. Blackwood's propaganda plan went beyond just spreading false information. It also used advanced psychological warfare methods to take advantage of the already existing social divisions in British society. The deepfake content was made to make tensions worse between different ethnic groups, economic classes, and political groups. This would lead to a lot of social unrest that would go far beyond any damage caused by bombs. As the Metropolitan Police units followed Jake through the streets of London, his radio crackled with incoming messages. But Thunder's continued anger made it clear that finding the warehouse had not gotten rid of the immediate threat. The horse's ears turned toward sounds that people couldn't hear, which made it seem like Blackwood was still somewhere in the building. The fight happened when Jake went deeper into the warehouse to get more evidence for the police, who were on their way. Blackwood came out of hiding behind server racks, moving with the controlled precision of someone who had been waiting for this moment and was ready for it. Instead of trying to run away or talk things over, he attacked right away with a tactical knife that he used like a pro. Jake's military training kicked in automatically as he blocked the first attack while protecting a civilian security guard who was with the police response team. The blade cut into his left forearm, leaving a deep cut that bled a lot but didn't stop him from fighting. More importantly, Jake's defensive moves put him between Blackwood and the warehouse's exit routes. This stopped the terrorist from getting away with important information about other cells operating in London. Thunder's intervention was both decisive and carefully planned. The horse charged forward with a lot of force, using its huge size to body-check Blackwood into some scaffolding that had been put up near the server arrays. The blow was strong enough to confuse the attacker and knock the knife out of his hand, but Thunder carefully adjusted his strength so that he didn't hurt the attacker too badly, which could have made it impossible to question him. Jake tied up Blackwood with zip ties made from computer cables, and Thunder kept watch to make sure he didn't try to get away. During this phase, the horse's behavior showed the advanced tactical intelligence that had made him such a useful asset during their time in Afghanistan. Thunder set himself up to keep an eye on both the prisoner and the many ways into the warehouse. His heightened senses gave him early warning of the police units coming. When Metropolitan Police bomb disposal experts showed up, it became clear how big the threat was that Thunder's detection skills had helped them avoid. There were several explosive devices in different stages of assembly in the warehouse. Each one was made to have the biggest psychological effect possible, not to kill people. The bombs were meant to make big explosions that would be shown on TV around the world during ceremonies, creating footage that would be talked about in the news for weeks. Experts in digital forensics who worked on Blackwood's computers found proof of a larger network that went well beyond London. The warehouse had been the center of operations for similar attacks planned against ceremonial events in other European capitals. This suggests that Thunder and Jake had stopped a string of attacks rather than just one. As emergency medical technicians worked on Jake's knife wound, Thunder showed the kind of emotional intelligence that sets great military working animals apart from regular ones. The horse moved slowly toward his hurt partner, which was very different from how he had acted aggressively before. He rested his huge head against Jake's uninjured shoulder as a sign of comfort and support that showed how deep their partnership was. The afternoon sun made long shadows on the Thames riverfront, and ambulance lights made the warehouse district look like it was lit up in blue and red. Jake Morrison sat on the back of a Metropolitan Police van while emergency medical technicians cleaned and bandaged the knife wound on his left forearm. The sting of the antiseptic was a small reminder of how close London had come to seeing unprecedented chaos during one of its most sacred ceremonies. Thunder stood nearby in a relaxed position that showed that his threat assessment systems had finally turned off after being on high alert for hours. The horse's huge head rested on Jake's uninjured shoulder, a gesture of comfort and solidarity that showed how close the two had become through shared danger and trust. Thunder's breathing had returned to the steady rhythm of normal operations, but his ears continued to pick up on subtle changes in the sounds around him, keeping him alert and aware, which had been so important throughout the morning's events. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen walked up at a slow, steady pace, as if she had been going over evidence for the past 3 hours that went against what most people thought they knew about modern terrorist threats. Her face showed the kind of professional respect that experienced investigators only gave to people who had stopped disasters from happening instead of just responding to them after they happened. "Trooper Morrison," she began, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to dealing with complicated security situations. "The preliminary forensics analysis confirms that your intervention this morning stopped what could have been one of the most sophisticated attacks in London's recent history. The explosive devices we found in the warehouse were made to have the most psychological impact rather than cause mass casualties, but the social disruption they would have caused could have lasted for months." Jake nodded, and Thunder's ears moved to follow Chen's movements. The horse was smart enough to know that the detective was a friend and not a threat to his injured partner. "Inspector, give Thunder the credit. His training and instincts picked up on the threat patterns long before humans could have. If he hadn't been so alert, we never would have figured out how Blackwood's operation was working." Chen looked at her tablet computer and scrolled through digital evidence that showed how big the conspiracy they had stopped really was. The deepfake content we found on Blackwood's servers was very advanced. His psychological warfare strategy would have used existing social tensions in British society to create a chain reaction that would have gone far beyond any physical damage from explosive devices. The automated social media campaigns were meant to flood platforms with false information within minutes of any disruption at Horse Guard's parade. Even in times of crisis, official channels that worked with bureaucratic efficiency had already started to show how the institution would respond to the events of the morning. Jake's radio crackled with messages from the Household Cavalry's administrative offices. These messages confirmed that formal disciplinary actions would be taken against him for breaking protocol, but that he would also be praised for stopping terrorist attacks on ceremonial grounds. Chen went on, "The Royal Protection Detail has asked for a full briefing on your horse's detection abilities." Her tone showed that she was really interested in Thunder's performance. Apparently, Thunder's ability to tell the difference between real electronics and modified trigger devices is a big step forward from traditional ways of finding explosives. The Defense Ministry is especially interested in how his training methods could be used with other military working animals. Thunder's reaction to the attention was typically humble. The horse didn't show any signs of ego or performance anxiety that might have affected people in the same situation. Instead, Thunder stayed focused on Jake's medical care and would sometimes gently nudge the bandaged arm, showing incredible spatial awareness and emotional intelligence. The personal stakes that had influenced many of Jake's decisions during the crisis were resolved, through channels that were not officially recognized or followed by the government. A secret donor had gotten in touch with Jake's predatory lending business and offered to pay off all of his debts. This took away the financial stress that had made him easy to manipulate and threatened his mother's safety. Later investigations would show that the benefactor was a quiet veterans assistance fund that worked under royal patronage to find cases where former military personnel were being taken advantage of because of problems they had while serving. Automated monitoring systems alerted the fund to Jake's case after his reports of security breaches started showing up in official databases. Jake's phone buzzed with a message that made him feel very different from the threatening messages he had gotten all morning. The text was from his mother's care facility, and it came with a picture of her watching TV coverage of the rehearsal for the ceremony with clear pride and recognition. The message, which was written down by staff at the care facility but used his mother's unique phrasing, said, "Saw you and Thunder on the news. I always knew you two were special. That horse loves you like family. Come see him soon and bring him if you can. I want to thank him properly for keeping my son safe." The changes that Thunder's performance brought about in the government started to show up in official channels, which would change the way ceremonial security worked for years to come. The Household Cavalry's standing orders were changed to make it clear that horses with special training could leave formation if they showed signs of being alert while on ceremonial duty. More importantly, Thunder's success showed that it was possible to combine animal senses with human tactical decision-making in urban security settings. Colonel Patricia Westbrook, the head of the Household Cavalry, got to the warehouse as forensic teams were finishing up their first round of evidence collection. Her being there showed how seriously senior leadership was taking the events of the morning and how they would affect future security arrangements for ceremonies. "Morrison," she said, her voice full of the authority that comes from years of military service, "what you did this morning shows exactly the kind of initiative and judgment that the Household Cavalry values in its personnel. However, the way you did it also shows that our current threat assessment protocols have some big holes in them." Thunder looked at Colonel Westbrook with the kind of respectful awareness that military animals show toward people in charge, but the horse stayed between Jake and any threats that might come up during the investigation. "Thunder will take on two roles starting right away," Westbrook said, looking at official papers that had been put together very quickly given how chaotic the morning had been. "He will keep doing his ceremonial duties, but he will also help train new human-animal threat detection protocols. His training in Afghanistan and proven skills in urban settings make him an invaluable asset for getting other teams ready to deal with similar situations." Intelligence channels that linked Blackwood's operation to similar threats across Europe were already showing how his arrest would affect things on a larger scale. The warehouse had been the center of planning for attacks on ceremonial events in several capitals. This suggests that Thunder and Jake stopped a continental campaign instead of just one attack on British traditions. Jake's wound throbbed with a dull ache that would remind him of what had happened that morning every day, but the pain was nothing compared to the satisfaction of having stopped something much worse than getting hurt. Thunder's warm breath on his neck kept reminding him that their partnership had passed its hardest test with more trust and respect for each other. As the afternoon went on and London's rhythm slowly returned to normal, Jake thought about the lesson Thunder had taught him about how important it is to trust your gut when lives are at stake instead of following rules. The horse's better senses gave Jake important information, but it was just as important that he was willing to act on that information even though it was against the rules and put his own safety at risk. When Thunder got to the same spot where he had first felt Blackwood's threat during the ceremonial rehearsal the following week, their shared adventure came to an end. This time, the horse did 2 calm stamps and then rested his huge head on Jake's shoulder. There was no danger, just a peaceful acknowledgement of a job well done and trust between partners who had proven themselves under the most difficult conditions. The city of London woke up around them. The light from the Thames danced on the water, and the sound of church bells ringing in the distance marked the passing of time. The mixture of steel and stone that made up the city was a perfect balance between tradition and technology. The events of the morning showed that the oldest partnerships, like those between people and animals, were sometimes the best way to protect against the newest threats in a world that is getting more complicated all the time.